Stay away from him. Martha Greer grabbed Claire Bennett's wrist hard enough to bruise. That man has put people in the ground for less than looking at him wrong. Down the hill, Cole Maddox stood at the corral fence, alone, his back to the whole of Timber Creek, and not one soul walked within 50 yards of him. Claire pried Martha's fingers loose. She'd ridden 3 days through red dirt country to open a schoolhouse, not to let a town's fear decide what she saw. She looked at Cole Maddox, and he turned slowly, deliberately, and looked straight back. Neither one dropped their gaze. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end, because every part of this is going to go somewhere you don't expect. And drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I read every one, and I love seeing how far this story travels. Claire Bennett had not come to Timber Creek to make enemies. She'd come with a trunk full of primers, a set of chalkboards, and the kind of conviction that doesn't need anyone's permission. The absolute certainty that children deserved better than ignorance, and that wherever there were children who needed teaching, she was the right woman for the job. She stepped off the stagecoach with both feet steady and her chin up, and the first thing she heard before a single hello, before one hand offered in welcome, was a warning. "You the new school teacher?" A woman with sun-creased skin and sharp brown eyes was already at her elbow, close as a confessor. Small town, Claire thought. Word moves like smoke here. "Claire Bennett," she said, and offered her hand. And yes. The woman took the hand briefly, as if prolonged contact might cost her something. "Martha Greer. My husband runs the feed store. I'll say this plain, because plain is kinder than letting you stumble into it. Keep away from Cole Maddox." Claire looked up and down the main street. Ordinary enough, a general store, a livery, a church with peeling paint, people going about their Thursday business. "I don't know anyone by that name," she said. "You will." Martha's voice dropped half a register. "Everyone does. He lives out on the Ridge property, Maddox land 3 miles east of town. Comes in once a week, sometimes less. When he does, sensible people find other things to do." "Is he violent?" Martha's jaw tightened. The hesitation before her next words was not the hesitation of uncertainty. It was the hesitation of someone selecting their most powerful ammunition. "His wife is dead. His boy is dead. His were the last hands near them before they were found." Claire went still. "He was charged." "Charged?" Martha gave a short, hollow sound that carried no warmth at all. "No charges. That's the worst of it. Nothing was ever done. Nothing official. So we do what we can. We make sure he knows he is not welcome. We make sure he feels what a man like that deserves to feel." That was the first thing Claire understood about Timber Creek. Not the dust, not the warped boardwalks, not the way the church steeple leaned 10 degrees to the east. It was the way justice had been quietly replaced by consensus. And the way consensus wore the face of moral certainty and dared you to dispute it. She didn't argue with Martha Greer. She just nodded, picked up her bag, and filed the name away. Cole Maddox. She saw him 40 minutes later. She was standing near the corral at the far end of the street, waiting on the liveryman to sort out her trunks, when she became aware of a change in the air around her. Not dramatic, just a shift the way a room shifts when someone opens a door onto cold. People didn't scatter exactly, but conversations lost their thread. Shoulders drew inward, eyes found the ground. And then she saw why. He came in from the east road on a dark horse, unhurried, straight in the saddle without any visible effort. A man somewhere in his early 40s, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had gone through weather, not just sun and wind, but the interior kind. The kind that no season changes. He wore no expression she could name. Not anger, not hardness, not contempt. Something closer to a permanent and comprehensive absence of expectation. As though the world had long since confirmed whatever it intended to show him, and he had simply adjusted. He tied the horse at the post without looking at anyone, and no one looked at him. That was the strangest detail, not avoidance exactly, but the practiced communal performance of invisibility. As if a town could decide collectively and daily that a man did not exist. as if that decision sustained long enough would eventually make itself true. Martha materialized at Claire's shoulder. "That's him." Claire said nothing. She studied Cole Maddox, moving across the street unhurried without apology, without any accommodation at all to the silence his presence had produced. And then, just before he stepped up onto the far boardwalk, he stopped. He turned his head. His eyes found Claire immediately and directly, not because she was unusual, but because she was the only one not looking away. She held it. 2 full seconds. Cole Maddox looked back at her with the same unblinking steadiness she offered him, measuring deliberate entirely without performance, and then he walked through the hardware store door and was gone. Martha took a short breath beside her. "What are you doing?" "Standing here," Claire said. "You don't stare at him." "I was looking. There's a difference." Martha grabbed her arm harder than before, less controlled. "That man is dangerous, Miss Bennet, and you have been in this town less than 2 hours. I am telling you for your own good. You do not look at him. You do not speak to him. And if he speaks to you, you find somewhere else to be. Am I understood?" Claire considered the hand on her arm. Then, "Has anyone asked him his version of what happened?" The silence from Martha was all the answer that existed. The schoolhouse was at the north end of town, and Claire walked through it alone that first afternoon, with her footsteps loud in the empty room, and felt the particular loneliness of a space built for purpose that had not yet found it. She counted 20 desks, a clean chalkboard, 2 windows that let in the afternoon light at a useful angle. Smaller than she'd hoped. Exactly as promising as she'd expected. She was testing the stiffness of the chalkboard when she heard boots on the porch steps. Not tentative boots. Boots that owned whatever surface they crossed. Hank Carver was a man who wore his authority the way certain men wore a fine coat conspicuously, and with the constant awareness of its value. He was large and well-fed, and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his life been told no, and been forced to live with it. "Miss Bennet." He didn't offer his hand. "I'm on the town council. I helped fund this building. I want to make sure we're clear on a few things before you get settled in." "I hope we will be," Claire said, and set down her chalk. "What would you like to be clear about?" "You're here to teach children. That is the whole of it. You're not here to make friends with people who don't belong in this community. You're not here to ask questions about matters that were settled before you arrived." He said it pleasantly. That was the detail that stayed with her afterward. The pleasantness threaded through it smooth and practiced, the way wire runs through a fence post without ever being seen until you reach for it. "Can you be specific, Mr. Carver?" Claire said, equally pleasant. "I'd hate to misunderstand you. I can be very specific." His eyes didn't change. "Cole Maddox, I saw you watching him at the corral. I'm telling you that this town has a memory, long memory, and we don't forget what that man is. What is he? A man whose family died under his roof. A man who walked away clean when he had no right to. Was there a trial? There didn't need to be." Claire held his gaze and let the silence stretch until it meant something. "In my experience, Mr. Carver, that is precisely the sentence behind which the most serious mistakes hide." Hank Carver looked at her with a new quality of attention. The pleasantness didn't leave his face, it just calcified. "I helped build this schoolhouse," he said very slowly. "Boards and nails and every dollar of it. Things that are built can be unbuilt." He left without waiting for her response. Claire stood in the empty room and felt the full shape of what she had walked into. Not a town with ordinary gossip and ordinary grudges. A community that had organized its entire identity around a specific sustained hatred, and had invested enough in that hatred that any challenge to it was a threat to the whole structure. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote the alphabet across the top of the board, neat and even and deliberate. She had dealt with harder things. The Reverend came that evening, and that was more unsettling because he came with a kind face. Reverend Thomas Dawson sat across the boarding house table from Claire and folded his hands and looked at her with the full warmth of a man who genuinely wished her well, which somehow made everything he said more difficult to push back against. "I heard about your exchange with Hank this afternoon," he said. "Word does move quickly here. Small-town virtues." He smiled, and it reached his eyes, which was the problem. "Hank means well. We all do. Timber Creek went through something terrible 3 years ago. The deaths of Cole Maddox's wife and son, it broke something here. Changed us. People need to believe they are safe. That someone is being held to account, even if the courts fail to do it formally." Claire set down her fork. "Reverend Dawson, do you believe he's guilty?" The kind face arranged itself with great care. "I believe the evidence was inconclusive. I believe that some things cannot be proven to a legal standard, and I believe that a community's peace is not always best served by the standards of a courtroom." "That," Claire said, "is a remarkable position for a man of God." Something moved through the Reverend's eyes, a flash of something honest behind the pastoral warmth there, and gone before she could fully read it. "I am a practical man," he said quietly, "and I am asking you as someone who genuinely wishes you well in this town not to make your life here harder than it has to be. Don't engage with Cole Maddox. Don't ask questions that will upset the people you need to live alongside. Teach your children. Build something good here. That is enough. Is it?" "For most people," he said, "it is everything." He stood and pressed his hand briefly to the table, as if steadying himself. "Good night, Miss Bennett." She sat for a long time after the door closed behind him. 3 separate people in her first day. Martha, Hank, the Reverend. All of them carrying the same message in 3 different containers. Don't look, don't ask, don't see. Stay within the lines we have drawn, which was, she had found across a lifetime of being the kind of woman she was, precisely the instruction that made it impossible to do anything but the opposite. Cole Maddox came into her path again on Thursday. She was crossing the main street carrying a box of primers. The county shipment had finally arrived. 40 books heavier than she could comfortably manage when she turned the corner by the dry goods store and walked directly into him. He pulled up short. So did she. The top layer of books shifted dangerously. He caught the box, reached out both hands steady on the sides half a second faster than her own reaction. Not a dramatic gesture, just a fact. The books didn't fall. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. Up close he was even more contained than distance had suggested. Not cold, not hostile, deeply internal, the way a man goes when he has learned through prolonged and painful experience that the world does not reward openness. His eyes were the color of river water over stone, and they assessed her with the same unhurried directness she'd seen at the corral. "Where are these going?" he said. "Schoolhouse, north end of town." He picked up the entire box without asking permission, just lifted it and started walking. Claire, after one moment of recalibration, walked beside him. She was completely aware of the heads turning, of conversations breaking off mid-sentence, of the particular quality of attention that a town reserves for the moment someone violates its unspoken laws. She kept her own posture easy, her stride unhurried, her face entirely composed. As if men helped carry boxes up the main street every Thursday in Timber Creek, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. "You're the teacher," Cole said. "Claire Bennett. And you're Cole Maddox." He didn't react to his own name, kept walking. "How long are you planning to stay?" "As long as the children need teaching." He was quiet for a moment. Then you'll stay a long time." Not flattery, not a performed compliment. Just a plain statement delivered as fact, as though he had in the space of 1.5 blocks accurately assessed what kind of person she was and simply confirmed it. She wasn't sure how he'd arrived there so quickly, but it landed with the precision of something true. He set the box on the schoolhouse porch, looked at the door once. "That latch needs replacing," he said. "Wind comes from the north end here in this valley. Storm hits, it'll blow open." Then he turned and walked back the way they'd come. Claire stood on the porch and looked at the latch. It was loose. She hadn't noticed. She looked back toward the street where Cole Maddox was already a receding figure, already being erased by the collective refusal of everyone around him to acknowledge his existence. She thought, "I see you fine." The children arrived Monday morning and filled the room with noise and nerves, and the particular smell of soap applied under protest. 14 of them, 6 to 13, arranged at their desks with the cautious obedience of children who'd been told to behave and weren't entirely sure what consequences awaited if they didn't. Claire stood at the front and felt the clean, uncomplicated purpose of it, the thing that had driven her to this profession in the first place. Here at least, nothing was complicated. Here a child either understood a word or didn't. Here a mind was either open or it wasn't. And in her experience, children's minds were almost always open. She was midway through the morning reading lesson when she became aware of a sound from outside. Not loud, steady and rhythmic. The knock of a hammer unhurried. 2 of the children craned toward the window. "Eyes on your books," Claire said without changing her tone. At noon, she stepped outside. The door latch had been replaced. Not just tightened, replaced entirely. New iron hardware set solid, and even the work of someone who understood both the tool and the problem. There was no note, no indication of who had come and gone. She didn't need one. Nettie Walsh lingered after the other children left that first afternoon. She was 9 years old with serious eyes and the posture of a child who carries more understanding than the adults around her find comfortable. She stood by the doorway and looked at Claire with the focused deliberateness of someone who has decided to say a difficult thing and is seeing it through. "Miss Bennett." "Yes, Nettie." "My mama told me you talked to Mr. Maddox in the street. He helped me carry some books." Nettie considered this with visible gravity. "Mr. Maddox fixed our fence last winter," she said, "when Papa took sick and the snow knocked it down. Mama didn't ask him. He just came one morning and did it, and when Mama tried to thank him, he said it wasn't anything and left." A pause, careful and deliberate. "Mama says we're not supposed to tell people." Claire looked at the girl. "Why not, Because people here wouldn't like it, and he'd get into trouble." Nettie's serious eyes held very still. "He's not what they say he is, Miss Bennett. I'm little, but I'm not stupid, and I know the difference." Claire crouched to the girl's level. "No," she said quietly. "You are not stupid at all." Nettie left. Claire sat in the empty schoolroom with fences fixed in snow and door latches replaced without acknowledgement, and a 9-year-old girl telling the clearest truth she'd heard in 5 days. And she thought about how much courage it takes to see what everyone around you has agreed not to see, and how that courage gets smaller and smaller the older people grow until most of them lose it entirely. She had not lost it yet. The truth came from a place she didn't expect, delivered by people who didn't know she was listening. Wednesday evening. She was in the back of the general store comparing prices on lamp oil when she heard Hank Carver's voice from 2 aisles over. Low private, the unhurried candor of a man who believes himself unheard. "Survey results never needed to go public," Hank said. "If Maddox had taken the offer when I made it, none of this would have been necessary." A second voice she didn't recognize, flatter, harder. "He wouldn't sell." "No, he wouldn't." A pause. "And now that land's going nowhere because he'll die on it before he signs anything. But he can't touch us either. The county records are exactly what they are, and he can't prove a damn thing otherwise." "He's not stupid, Hank. He's alone. There is a considerable difference." Claire did not move. She stood between the canned goods and the lamp oil and let those words arrange themselves in the exact order they demanded. Survey results, county records. If Maddox had taken the offer, she thought about what Martha had said that first day. "His wife is dead, his boy is dead." She thought about what the Reverend had said, the evidence was inconclusive. She thought about the absolute communal certainty with which an entire town had assembled its judgment of one man and refused to revisit a single word of it. And she began to understand, with the cold, specific clarity of connecting one fact to the next, that the story of Cole Maddox had nothing to do with violence. That what had been built in this town, the hatred, the organized exclusion, the moral armor of the righteous, had been constructed by the very people calling loudest for justice. and that it had been built on purpose. If Maddox had taken the offer, the Ridge property, the Maddox land. She set the lamp oil carefully back on the shelf, walked to the counter, paid without hurry, without looking toward the back of the store, and went out into the evening air. Her hands were steady. Her mind was anything but. That night she sat with the weight of it in a way she had not sat with anything in a long time. A man who lost his wife, his child, his name in the only community he'd ever belonged to. And he had stayed. That was the thing that struck her, the detail she couldn't move past. He had not left. He came to town every week on that dark horse and conducted his business quietly, and went home to a Ridge property that someone wanted badly enough to destroy a family to obtain. He had stayed because to leave was to confirm the story they'd written about him. He had stayed because the land was his, and he had refused to let anyone take it, not by sale, not by condemnation, not by making his life in Timber Creek so unbearable that he would eventually break. He had not broken. She thought about what survival looks like when you have been stripped of every reason you had for living except the one they cannot take. When there is no audience left whose approval matters. When grief has burned through everything else and what remains is only what was most essentially true in you from the beginning. She thought about a replaced door latch, a fence built in the snow, a man who helped and asked for nothing and expected nothing and received nothing because that was the only version of himself he was still permitted to offer. In the morning, she went north. She did not tell herself what she was doing. She told herself she was checking the road conditions for future supply runs. She told herself several reasonable things as she walked the east road, and none of them were the reason her feet were moving. Cole Maddox saw her coming from 100 yards. She knew because the work stopped. He'd been mending fence line, and he straightened and stood and watched her approach without moving toward her or away. She stopped 10 feet from him. He waited. No greeting, no performance. Just the patient, watchful stillness of a man who has learned not to waste himself on what might not matter. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to know that I've already heard Timber Creek's version of your story, and I don't believe it's the complete one." Something moved in his face, not surprise exactly. Something older than surprise, like the recognition of a thing you stopped letting yourself expect. "You can ask," he said. "Did Hank Carver try to buy this land before your family died?" The stillness that settled over Cole Maddox then was not the stillness of a man with nothing to say. It was the stillness of a man who had been carrying a specific and unanswerable weight for 3 years and had just been asked for the first time to put it down. He looked at her for a long moment. A horse shifted somewhere beyond the fence. The wind moved through the dry grass. "Yes," he said. One word, flat and plain, and heavier than anything else Claire had heard in Timber Creek. How many times did he ask? 4. "And 3 months after the last time you refused?" Cole Maddox looked out toward the ridgeline. When his eyes came back to her, they held the particular expression of a man who has had to become very precise about what he allows himself to feel, because feeling too much without outlet is a different kind of dying. "My wife and my boy were gone," he said. Claire held his gaze and did not flinch from it. "And the town decided you were responsible. The town needed a story." His voice was level and without self-pity, which was somehow the hardest part to hear. "Hank gave them one, and a story told often enough by enough people stops needing evidence." The morning was clear and unhurried, and entirely indifferent to what was happening inside it. Cole Maddox looked at her with the eyes of a man who had already calculated the next move, the one where she stepped back, where she found a way to unknow what she'd just been told, where she made the easier choice. The one every person before her had made. Claire took a step forward. "My name is Claire Bennett," she said, as if they were meeting for the first time, as if this were the real beginning of it. "I teach the children of the people who hate you, and I need you to tell me everything." Cole Maddox looked at her for a long, steady moment. The kind of moment that takes its time because it understands what it carries. "You understand what that will mean for you," he said. "In this town." "I understand it completely," she said. He studied her face, reading it the way a man reads a landscape he has to cross, looking for what's solid, what will hold. And something in his expression shifted, not by much, just enough to matter. Something that had been sealed for a very long time, and had not expected this particular kind of knock at the door. "Then you'd better come in," he said. Cole held the door, and Claire walked through it. He didn't make any of the small social gestures men usually offered guests, no wave toward a chair, no offer of water, no comfortable filler to ease the strangeness of two people standing in a private space with the weight of an entire town between them. He just moved to the far side of the room and stood with his arms at his sides and looked at her with the same level, direct attention he'd offered outside. As if she had asked for the truth, and now it was simply a question of whether she could hold it. "What exactly do you want to know?" he said. "All of it," Claire said. "From the beginning." He studied her face for a moment, testing maybe whether she meant it, whether this was curiosity or something with more backbone in it. Then he pulled out a chair for her, not himself, and leaned against the far wall and crossed his arms and began. "My family settled this ridge 12 years ago," he said. "My wife Ruth and I built this place from nothing. 3 years after that, my son James was born in this house." He paused, not for effect, just for accuracy. "Hank Carver came to me the first time about the land when James was 4 years old. He was pleasant enough about it. Said the valley was growing. Said my property sat on the best water table in the county. Said he'd give me twice what any fair assessment would put it at." "And you refused," Claire said. "I said no. This was Ruth's home, James's home. What would I have bought with that money that was worth more than what we already had?" He looked at her with steady, flat certainty. "So he came back. 4 times in 14 months. Each time the offer got larger, and his pleasantness got a little thinner. The 4th time I told him that, if he came to my property again with the same question, he would leave without being asked twice." "He stopped coming," Claire said. "He stopped coming," Cole confirmed. "And roughly 3 months after that, Ruth went to town on a Tuesday for supplies. James went with her." He stopped. The muscles in his jaw moved controlled and careful. "The stage road has a bad curve 2 miles from town coming up from the dry creek bed. The horse spooked. The wagon went over the edge." Claire waited. The silence was the kind that shouldn't be filled. "They said it was an accident," Cole said. "And maybe it was. I will never know for certain. That's the part that doesn't leave you not the grief, because grief at least has a shape. It's the not knowing. Because if it was an accident, my wife and my son died because of bad luck and a frightened horse. And if it wasn't—" He stopped. When he came back, his voice was steady in the way that cost something. "If it wasn't, then I know exactly who had reason for it, and I cannot prove it. And I have lived with both of those possibilities every single day for 3 years." The room held very still around them. "What made the town decide it was you?" Claire asked. "Hank," Cole said simply. "He started the story within a week. Said I'd been violent toward Ruth. Said neighbors had heard things. Said the accident was convenient." A pause. "There were no neighbors close enough to hear a thing from this house. There never had been. But a story doesn't need witnesses. It only needs someone the town trusts to deliver it." And they trusted Hank Carver. They trusted his money. In a town this size, that is the same thing. Claire sat with that. Then, "Why didn't you leave?" The question seemed to catch him, not because it was unexpected, but because he'd asked it of himself enough times that hearing it spoken aloud by another person carried a different weight entirely. "Because this is my land," he said. "Ruth is buried on this ridge. James is buried on this ridge." His voice didn't break, but something beneath it did, far down, held in by pure and practiced discipline. "If I leave, Hank gets the land and the story both. He wins on every count. And I decided the week after I put my son in the ground that the one thing I would not give that man was my absence." Claire looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "That took everything you had," she said. "Yes," he said. "It did." It was the most honest thing she'd heard in Timber Creek. No martyrdom, no performance, no reaching for sympathy. Just the plain acknowledgement of a man who had paid an enormous price for a decision that was entirely his own and was still paying it and had no intention of stopping. "Is there evidence?" she asked. "Anything concrete, survey documents, correspondence, anything that puts Hank's hand on the land records." Cole's eyes sharpened. "How do you know about the survey records?" "I overheard him at the general store. He told someone the county records were what they are, and you couldn't prove otherwise." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the wall and crossed the room. He came back with a worn envelope, the kind that had been handled many times and folded back carefully each time. He held it, but didn't hand it to her yet. "There's a man named Elias Pruitt," he said. "He was the county surveyor when Hank first started acquiring land in this valley. Elias did the original survey on this ridge property and 2 others nearby. He showed me privately 2 years ago that the official county record doesn't match his field notes. Someone changed the boundary markers after his original filing. Someone with access to the records office." "Hank Carver," Claire said. "Or someone Hank paid." Cole looked at the envelope. "Elias kept the original field notes. He's held them all this time. But he's 67 years old, and he lives alone on the south end of town, and he is afraid. He told me he couldn't use them publicly, that if he did his livelihood, his home, everything he had left would be in Hank Carver's hands inside a month." "So the evidence exists," Claire said, "and it's held hostage by one man's fear." "That's the correct description of it," Cole said. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a single letter in careful, precise handwriting. Elias Pruitt's clearly laying out in plain terms what his field notes contained and what they proved. The kind of document a frightened, careful man writes to create a record without making a move that costs him everything. Claire read it twice, folded it back exactly as she'd found it, and returned it to Cole. "He's not the only afraid one," she said. "This whole town is afraid. They've organized their fear into hatred, because hatred is easier to sustain than doubt." She held his gaze directly. "Someone needs to not be afraid." Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely name, something balanced between warning and something warmer, something he hadn't allowed himself in so long that it moved through his face like a word in a language he'd almost forgotten. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you've been in this town 6 days. I know exactly how long I've been here. Then you understand what this town does to people who go against the man who controls its money." "I know what it does to people who don't," she said. He had no answer for that. He looked at her, and something in his face did the thing she'd seen at the corral, that slight, involuntary recalibration, like a door that has been shut a long time and keeps receiving unexpected knocks and is slowly, against its own better judgment, beginning to consider what might be on the other side. "I'll think on what you've said," he told her. "That's all I'm asking." And because it was true, and she believed in saying true things plainly, "You're not alone in this anymore, Mr. Maddox, whether you want to be or not." She left before he could argue with that. Martha Greer was waiting on the main street when Claire came back from the East Road, not by accident. By position, arms crossed, planted directly in Claire's path, with the posture of a woman who has rehearsed every word she intends to say. "You went out there," Martha said. "I did." "To his property." "I did," Claire said again, and kept walking. Martha fell in step beside her. "Miss Bennett, I am trying to help you. What you're doing is going to cost you everything you came here to build. These people—" She dropped her voice without softening it. "They do not separate themselves from the grudges they hold. If they decide you're on Cole Maddox's side, they will pull their children from that school, every last one." Claire stopped, turned, looked at Martha with the patient, direct attention she gave to problems that required clear thinking. "Martha, do you actually believe he killed his family?" Martha's jaw went tight. "I believe, not what Hank believes, not what the Reverend tells the congregation. You. Do you personally believe it?" The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Martha's eyes shifted, came back, moved away again. "It doesn't matter what I personally," It matters enormously what you personally believe, Claire said, because you are a person, not a crowd, and those are entirely different things. She held Martha's gaze steady. Think about that. She walked away before Martha could reconstruct her position. Thursday's school had 9 children in it instead of 14. Claire counted the empty desks and kept her face entirely neutral and taught the 9 who were present with the exact same energy she would have given all 14. At the end of the day, she sat and wrote a letter to the county school board, measured, precise, factual. Not accusatory. The kind of letter a careful person writes to create a record for later. Nettie Walsh was among the 9. She stayed after again. 3 of them aren't coming back, she said. Tommy Hicks, both the Dawson girls, their parents said. I know, Claire said. It's because of Mr. Maddox. Not really a question. It's because of fear, Claire said. Fear that's been arranged to look like principle. Nettie sat with that the way she sat with everything, slowly, completely, with the full weight of a serious mind. Are you scared, Miss Bennett? Of what specifically? Of them. Of what they'll do to you. No, Claire said. And then, because Nettie Walsh deserved the full truth. I'm careful, that's different. Careful means I pay attention. Scared means I stop. I don't intend to stop. Nettie nodded once. Mr. Maddox came by our house again last week, she said. Fixed the rotten step on the porch. Mama didn't ask him. He just came one morning and did it. When Mama tried to thank him, he said it wasn't anything and left. A pause. Mama cried after. Why did she cry? She said it was because she felt terrible that we couldn't do anything for him in return. She can, Claire said quietly. She just doesn't know it yet. Hank Carver found her Friday morning. He didn't come to the schoolhouse this time. He came to the boarding house where she was eating breakfast and sat himself across from her without being invited, and folded his large hands on the table with the studied composure of a man who believes he owns every room he enters. I hear you've been riding the East Road, he said. Claire put down her coffee cup. You hear a great deal for a man who says he runs a ranch. I run a ranch and I run this town council, and I am responsible for a considerable portion of what keeps this community standing, he said. That's not boasting, that's accounting. What do you want, Mr. Carver? I want you to understand your situation clearly. He leaned forward slightly. This school exists because people in this community decided it should. I was the primary voice for that decision. I can be the primary voice for the opposite decision just as easily, and there is not one man on that council who will vote against me when I ask them not to. You'd close a school to punish a teacher for speaking to a man. I'd close a school to protect this community from an outside influence that doesn't understand what it's dealing with. He held her gaze steadily. You're new here. I'll allow for that. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider your position before I take steps that neither of us will enjoy. Claire looked at him without blinking. You offered to buy Cole Maddox's land 4 times, Mr. Carver. The composure held, but something behind it went very, very still. Where did you hear that? Is it true? Business negotiations are private. Is it true? Hank Carver looked at her across the table with eyes that had quietly and completely revised their initial assessment of her into something considerably more alert. You are making an enemy, he said very quietly, that you do not have the resources to manage. I've made a note of it, Claire said. He straightened his coat with the controlled calm of a man reasserting authority over a conversation that had slipped from his hands. Then he left. Claire finished her breakfast. Her appetite, to her own mild surprise, was entirely intact. Cole Maddox came to town that Saturday. He came every week. That was not unusual. What happened on the street near the livery was, a boy of about 7 had gotten his foot wedged between 2 warped boards of the boardwalk, and was stuck fast and frightened, his mother kneeling beside him in a visible panic, unable to get the angle to free it. Several men stood nearby and watched with the particular passivity that arrives in moments that seem embarrassing rather than dangerous. Cole Maddox saw it from across the street. He crossed without hesitation, crouched in front of the boy, and said something in a voice too quiet for Claire watching from the hardware store porch to catch. Whatever he said made the boy stop struggling and go still. Cole worked the board free in 30 seconds, the right grip, the right angle, the practical knowledge of a man who understands how things are built and therefore exactly how they fail. The boy's mother spoke to Cole. Cole nodded once, stood, and went back to his business without waiting for anything more from her. The men who had stood and watched said nothing. The boy watched Cole walk away with the absolute, uncomplicated attention of a child who does not yet know what he is supposed to think about a person who sees only what happened and what it cost and what it meant. Claire stepped off the porch and fell in alongside Cole. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "He was stuck," Cole said. "You know what I mean." He glanced at her sideways. "I know what you mean. I also know that a 7-year-old boy caught in a boardwalk doesn't care what the town has decided about me." "No," Claire said. "He doesn't." They walked together in silence, and she was fully aware of the heads turning, the conversations dropping away, the weight of being seen beside him. She had decided somewhere between Thursday morning and Friday night that being seen was no longer something she intended to manage around. "I talked to Elias Pruitt," Cole said, without preamble, without build-up. Claire stopped walking. "When, yesterday, told him there was someone else who knew about the survey documents now, that he wasn't the only one carrying it." He looked at her steadily. "He didn't commit to anything, but he didn't say no. That's more than he's offered in 2 years." "That's something," Claire said. "It's a beginning, which is different from something." She looked at him. He was doing the thing again, that careful containment, the practiced holding in of whatever was actually moving inside him. The habit of a man who had learned through prolonged and painful experience that showing too much in the wrong direction cost too much. "Cole," she said. First time she'd used his given name. She saw it register a small involuntary stillness in him, barely visible. He waited. "You fixed that boy's foot today because it was right. You replaced my door latch because it needed doing. You built a fence in the snow for a sick man's family. You have done all of that while this town spent every day telling you that you don't exist." She held his gaze without softening it. "I want you to understand that I see every single one of those things." Cole Maddox looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not openly, but enough. The door that had been sealed shut for 3 years moved. Not open, not yet, but off the latch, and that was the beginning of everything. "You're going to get yourself run out of Timber Creek," he said. "Probably," she said, "but not before I finish what I came here to do." She turned and walked back toward the schoolhouse. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel him watching her go, and she knew in the precise, wordless way you know certain things before they have a name, that Cole Maddox was standing in the middle of that street for the first time in 3 years, feeling something other than the clean, manageable weight of being entirely alone. That evening, Reverend Dawson called a town meeting. Claire heard about it from Bess Walsh-Neddy's mother, who came to the boarding house just before supper with her hands twisted together and her voice carefully measured to stay below panic. "They're meeting at the church," Bess said. "The councilmen, some of the ranchers. Hank called it." She paused. "It's about you, Miss Bennett. About whether the school continues." Claire looked at her calmly. "Are you afraid, Mrs. Walsh?" Bess Walsh's hands tightened around each other. "Yes," she said. Then, in a voice that went quiet with a different kind of feeling. "But Nettie came home yesterday and read me a full page from her primer without stopping once. First time in her life. She couldn't get through a full sentence 2 weeks ago." Her voice fractured just slightly on the last word. Claire waited. "I don't know what to do," Bess said. "Yes, you do," Claire said gently. "You're just afraid of what it'll cost." Bess looked at her for a long, trembling moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from Claire and sat down and folded her hands and said, Tell me what I can do." Claire did not go to the meeting. She made that choice deliberately, because appearing before a council already arranged against her was not strength, it was theater, and she had no interest in performing for Hank Carver's audience on Hank Carver's terms. Instead, she sat at her desk and wrote lesson plans. Not for next week. For 12 weeks, organized, detailed, complete, written in the same careful hand she used for everything. As if there were not one possibility in the world that she would not be standing in front of those children to teach them. When she finished, she put on her coat and stepped outside. The night was cool and enormous, and entirely indifferent to what was happening inside it. She looked out toward the east ridge where a single lamp burned in Cole Maddox's window, 3 miles away, entirely alone. She stood there a while looking at that light. She thought about a man who had refused to leave and refused to break and refused to grant anyone the satisfaction of his disappearance. She thought about the particular kind of courage that is not dramatic, not loud, not visible in the way that earns recognition, the courage that is simply going on day after day in the face of everything arranged to make you stop. She thought about Bess Walsh sitting down at that table. She thought about Nettie reading a full page without stopping, and about what it had meant to a mother to hear it. The lamp on the ridge stayed lit. Claire turned and went inside, and she did not allow herself to examine too carefully why the sight of that single light burning alone against 3 miles of dark made her feel for the first time since she'd arrived in Timber Creek that she was not alone either. Walsh. Bess Walsh came in the morning with news from the meeting. "They voted," Bess said. "Controlled, but only just. 6-2 to issue you a formal warning. They're not closing the school, not yet. But Hank put it on official record that any further contact with Cole Maddox is grounds for removal." Claire absorbed this. "Who voted against?" Bess hesitated. "Reverend Dawson abstained. Tom Greer, Martha's husband, voted no on the warning." That was unexpected. Claire filed it with care. "And Hank," she said. "He said—" Bess stopped, swallowed. "He said if you didn't comply, he would make certain no school district in this county would ever hire you again. That he had connections to the board and would not hesitate." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Walsh, did your daughter ask to read with you this morning?" Bess blinked at the shift. Yes. First thing she does now. Every morning." "Then the school is working," Claire said simply. "And as long as it's working, I'm staying." Bess looked at her with an expression that moved through several things in quick succession: fear and relief, and the first fragile tentative shape of resolve. "You're a stubborn woman, Miss Bennett," she said. "I prefer thorough," Claire said. "But yes." Cole came to the schoolhouse that afternoon. She heard the horse, then his boots on the steps, then 2 solid, unhurried knocks. She opened the door. He held his hat in one hand at his side, something she'd never seen him do. Such a small, ordinary gesture of courtesy. It caught her entirely off guard, the smallness of it against everything else he carried. "I heard about the meeting," he said. "Word travels. It always does in this town." He looked at her steadily. "You need to know that what they're threatening is real. Hank has removed 2 teachers from positions in other towns. People who asked questions he didn't like. He has the connections, he claims." "I know," she said. "You know, and you're still here." "I know, and I'm still here," she confirmed. Cole Maddox looked at her with something in his face that she thought for the first time she might be close to naming. Not admiration exactly, though it was near to it. The specific expression of a man who has come through long and costly experience to understand the genuine rarity of a person who does not fold under weight and who is encountering one in a context he had completely, entirely, and permanently stopped expecting. "Then there's something I need to tell you," he said. "Come in," she said, and held the door open. Cole came inside and stood with his hat still in his hand, which told Claire that whatever he'd carried here had been a long time on the road before it arrived. "Elias Pruitt sent word this morning," he said. "He wants to meet." Claire went still. He changed his mind. He said something shifted for him. Cole looked at her with a directness that carried its own question inside it. He said he heard there was a school teacher asking questions around town. Said if someone like that was willing to put themselves in front of this thing, he couldn't keep sitting behind his door. The air between them held for a moment. "When?" Claire said. "Tonight, after dark. His place." "I'll be there," she said. "Miss Bennett." "I'll be there, Cole." He looked at her the same way he'd looked at her that first day at the corral, measuring careful reading the depth of a thing before he committed to believing it was real. Then he put his hat back on and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back just slightly. "You should know," he said, "that if Hank finds out Elias is talking, things will move faster than either of us is ready for." "Then we'd better not waste tonight," she said. He held her gaze for one more beat. Then he walked out and Claire stood in the empty schoolroom and heard his horse leave at a steady, unhurried pace and understood that something had just changed, not in what they knew, but in what they'd agreed to do with it. Sig. The meeting with Elias Pruitt lasted 2 hours, and it changed everything. He was a small man with careful hands and eyes that had spent decades reading land and distance, eyes that could spot a misplaced marker at 40 yards, but had learned over the last 3 years to look away from the things that mattered most. He sat across his kitchen table from Cole and Claire, and put his original field notes between them and didn't touch them as if physical contact with the truth still carried a price he was calculating. "I know what's in those records," Elias said. "I know what was changed, and I know when, and I know what it means." He looked at his hands. "I also know what Hank Carver did to Frank Heller when Frank tried to dispute a property line 2 years ago. Lost his land, his credit, and left the county with nothing." "What would it take," Claire said, "to make you willing to put your name to what you know?" Elias looked at her. The question seemed to surprise him, not because it was unexpected, but because it had been asked without preamble, without softening, without the usual social machinery people used when they were asking someone to be brave. "Honestly," he said. "That's all I'm after," Claire said. "It would take knowing that someone with authority outside this county was going to see those notes before Hank had a chance to move against me." He looked at Cole. "You've got no standing here. Maddox, no offense. You're the man they've already decided is guilty of something. Your word against Hank's isn't even a contest, but a formal letter to the county land office," Claire said slowly, "from an official surveyor with the original field notes attached that goes on record before Hank can touch it." Elias was quiet. "How fast can you write?" Claire asked. Elias Pruitt looked at her for a long moment, then at Cole, then back at her. And something in the old man's face shifted something that had been held under careful, frightened management for a very long time, and had grown without his permission, exhausted by the holding. "I can write tonight," he said. They left Elias's house past 10 o'clock, and the sky had been building since sundown. Cole read it before Claire did the pressure in the air, the particular stillness that precedes violence, and they had barely cleared the edge of town when the storm came down in full. It was not a polite storm. It came sideways hard and sudden, the kind that doesn't negotiate. Cole's horse pulled up short, and Claire grabbed his arm without thinking, his forearm solid as fence post beneath her hand, and he made a decision in half a second. Not the boarding house, not the ridge, but the livery barn 3 strides away, whose door was still unlocked. They made it inside. The door swung shut behind them. Outside, the storm announced itself against every surface it could find. They stood in the dark and the noise and caught their breath. Cole lit a lantern from his coat pocket. He was the kind of man who carried one as a matter of course, which she filed as characteristic and set it on the post. The horses shifted and settled. The storm kept its own counsel. "You're soaked," he said. "So are you," she said. He moved to the far end and came back with a horse blanket, plain dry, smelling of work and animal. He held it toward her with the matter-of-fact directness he brought to everything, no ceremony in it. She took it and pulled it around her shoulders, and they both sat on the hay bales along the near wall and listened to the storm work itself out against the roof. The silence between them was different from any silence she'd shared with him before. Outside, silences had the whole sky in them, and the distance of his ridge, and the buffer of everything they hadn't said yet. This silence was close and immediate, and held more than it could comfortably contain. "Tell me about Ruth," Claire said. She asked it quietly, without apology. She'd thought about whether to ask it, and decided that not asking was a form of dishonesty, that treating his grief as something to be carefully avoided was its own kind of disrespect. Cole looked at the lantern for a moment. "Why?" "Because you've been living with her ghost and the town's version of her story for 3 years, Claire said. "And I'd like to know who she actually was." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "She was funny," he said. "That's the thing people don't know about her, because she wasn't funny with people she didn't trust. With strangers, she was quiet, polite. Exactly what you'd expect. But privately..." Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, but the shadow grief leaves when it passes through a good memory. She could say one sentence and make you laugh for 10 minutes. James had it too. He got it from her. "How old was he?" Claire asked. 7. Cole said it flat and direct. He had made peace with the number, she realized. Not with the loss that was a different thing, but with the number itself, the age, the fixed and permanent fact of it, because acceptance of the specific was the only thing left that honored what was true. He was 7 and 4 months, and he was learning to whistle, and he couldn't get it right, and it drove him absolutely crazy. He stopped. He'd have figured it out by August. I know he would have. Claire didn't say she was sorry. She'd found in her life that sorry was what people offered when they had nothing more precise to give. Instead, she said, "He sounds like someone worth knowing." Cole turned and looked at her. The lantern light did its work between them, and he looked at her for a long, unguarded moment, the first completely unguarded moment she'd seen from him. The first time the door hadn't just moved off its latch, but opened an actual inch, and then he looked away. "Why did you come here?" he said. "To Timber Creek specifically. There are other towns with children who need teaching." Claire had been expecting the question. She'd been deciding for 2 days what she would say when it arrived. "I grew up in a town that did what Timber Creek is doing," she said. "Different man, different story. But the same architecture. A man everyone had decided was guilty of something he didn't do, and a community that organized its identity around that decision and defended it long after the evidence stopped supporting it." She paused. "I was 12 years old when that man was driven out of our town, and I watched it happen, and I didn't say anything because I was 12 and I was afraid, and I didn't know what I was seeing clearly enough to name it." "What happened to him?" Cole said. "I don't know. He left and no one followed to find out." She looked at the lantern. "I've taught in 4 towns since I started. Every one of them had a version of this. A person the community had decided to organize its fear around. I don't know if that's human nature or just the nature of small places, but I stopped being able to look away from it." She paused. "So no, Timber Creek wasn't random." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You came here because of me." "I came here because of children who needed a teacher," she said. "I stayed because of you." She said it simply, without performance, the way she said all true things. And she watched it land on him, watched the man who had spent 3 years receiving nothing from the world except the organized and consistent message that he did not deserve anything. Absorb those words like someone who has forgotten what warmth on skin feels like, and suddenly remembers all at once. He didn't speak for a moment. "That's a dangerous thing to say in this town," he said finally. "I'm a thorough woman," she said, "not a careful one." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, barely visible, quickly contained but real. The first thing resembling a smile she'd seen from Cole Maddox, and it transformed his face in a way that she understood immediately and entirely. This was what he'd looked like before. Before the loss and the accusation and 3 years of organized erasure. This was the man Ruth had known. She looked away before she said something else she wasn't ready to say. Outside, the storm peaked and began its slow descent. They were still in the barn when the door opened. It was not a gentle opening. Hank Carver stood in it with 2 men behind him and a lantern of his own. and the particular expression of a man who has found exactly what he was looking for, which is the most dangerous kind of expression a man like Hank Carver can wear. "Well," he said. He looked at Cole. He looked at Claire. His voice was very quiet. "This is unfortunate." Cole stood up from the hay bale without hurry. He put himself between Hank and Claire with no particular drama, just a shift of position, a placement of himself the way a man stands when he has decided where the line is. "You have business here, Carver," he said. "I believe I do," Hank said. "Miss Bennett, your landlady has been looking for you. There's concern about your whereabouts given the storm." He paused, letting the implication expand in the air. "I'll escort you back." "I know my way back," Claire said. "I insist." "Miss Bennett said she knows her way back," Cole said. His voice was even unhurried and carried the specific weight of a man who will not be moved. Hank looked at him. The two men behind him shifted their weight. "Maddox," Hank said, the pleasantness gone now, all the way gone, nothing left beneath it but the cold mechanics of a man used to winning. "You have no standing in this town to speak on anyone's behalf. You have no standing here at all." "And yet, here I am," Cole said. The moment held. Claire stepped forward around Cole and directly in front of Hank Carver, and looked up at him with an expression that was entirely clear. "Mr. Carver," she said, "I will walk back to the boarding house on my own, in my own time when this storm permits it. If you attempt to use tonight against me or against Mr. Maddox, I want you to know that I have been writing letters to the county school board, to the district land office, and to the county sheriff in Harlan for the past 4 days. I write one every evening. Detailed, factual, dated letters, all of which are already in the mail." She held his gaze. "Do with that information whatever you'd like." Hank Carver looked at her. The silence was the kind that comes when a man recalculates in real time and dislikes every number he arrives at. He left without another word. The two men behind him went with him. Cole looked at Claire. "Are those letters real?" "Every one of them," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've been busy." "I told you, thorough." The first consequence came the next morning, and it came from a direction neither of them had prepared for. Martha Greer was standing at the schoolhouse door when Claire arrived to open up. Not with her arms crossed, not with the practiced positioning of a woman who has prepared her argument, just standing, her hands at her sides, her face carrying something Claire hadn't seen on it before. Not softness exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding a position for a very long time and has finally quietly put it down. "I need to tell you something," Martha said. "Come in," Claire said. Martha sat in one of the student chairs, chose it over the teacher's chair, which Claire noticed, and put her hands in her lap and looked at them for a moment. 3 years ago, Martha said, "The week after Ruth and James died, I saw Hank Carver talking to Deke Sully outside the hardware store. Deke was the man they sent to examine the wagon after the accident. Determine the cause." She paused. "I saw Hank pass him something. An envelope. Deke put it in his coat without opening it." The room was very quiet. "I didn't know what it meant at the time," Martha said. "Or I told myself I didn't. But I knew Miss Bennett. I knew, and I told myself that Cole Maddox was a difficult man and that the town needed peace and that some things were better left where they landed." She looked up. "Tom, my husband, he never believed Cole was responsible. Not for a single day. He voted against that warning because I finally stopped telling him to stay out of it." She pressed her lips together. "I'm not a coward. I've never been a coward. But I was one about this." Claire looked at her steadily. "You're here now," she said. "I am." Martha straightened. "What do you need from me?" Claire thought for a moment. Then, "Do you know where Deke Sully is now?" "He left Timber Creek about 6 months after the accident," Martha said. "Moved to a place called Crestfall, 2 counties east. My sister lives there. I know the town." "Then I need you to write your sister a letter," Claire said. "Tonight." Martha nodded slowly. "And Cole," she said. "Does he know about Deke Sully?" "Not yet," Claire said. Martha stood. Something in her posture had reorganized itself not dramatically but definitively. The way a person looks when they've stopped carrying a weight they should have put down a long time ago. "Tell him," she said. "From me. Tell him I'm sorry it took this long." She left. Claire sat for a moment and let the shape of what had just happened fully settle. Not just what Martha had seen, but what it meant. Because if Deke Sully had been paid to file a false accident report, then the death of Ruth and James Maddox was not an accident at all. And the man sitting 3 miles east on a ridge living every day inside the not knowing, the unbearable, impossible divide between grief and fury, with no way to choose between them, that man deserved to know which one was right. Claire locked the schoolhouse and went to find him. She found Cole at the fence line where she'd first come to him, and she told him everything in the order it had happened without softening any of it. She told him about Martha, about Deke Sully, about the envelope outside the hardware store. She watched his face as she said it. He didn't react the way most men would have reacted. He didn't rage or break or go hard. He went very still. The stillness she'd first read as coldness and now understood was the stillness of a man who has learned that his feelings are more powerful than the available space for them, and has therefore taught himself to hold them in small containers until he can find somewhere adequate to put them. "Say that again," he said. "The part about Deke." She said it again. "Exactly." Cole looked out at the ridgeline. A muscle moved in his jaw. "I always thought it was deliberate," he said very quietly. 3 years. Every day. I thought I knew, and I could not prove it, and I could not stop knowing it, and the town was looking at me like I had done it myself." He stopped. Knowing and not being able to prove it is its own kind of... He stopped again, pressed his mouth shut. "I know," Claire said. "You don't..." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time the containment slipped entirely, and what was underneath it was raw and immediate. "You don't know what it is to look at your son's grave every morning and not know if you failed him or if someone took him from you. Those are completely different kinds of grief, Miss Bennett, and I have lived inside both of them every single day for 3 years, and I am... His voice broke. Not dramatically, just cleanly, the way something breaks when it has held too long, and the weight finally exceeds the structure. Claire crossed the distance between them without thinking. She put her hand on his arm, his forearm solid and taut, and held it there and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that was more important than not leaving him alone inside that moment. He didn't move away. He looked at her hand on his arm. And then he put his own hand over hers briefly, 1 second no more, and then he straightened and pulled back and looked at the middle distance and breathed. "If Deke Sully is in Crestfall," he said, and his voice was level again, controlled, built back up by sheer force of will, and Martha's sister can find him. "And if Elias sends his letter to the land office this week, then Hank Carver has a problem," Cole said. "A real one." "Yes," Claire said. "He does." Cole looked at her. "This morning he sent 2 men to Elias Pruitt's house." Claire's breath shortened. "What happened?" "Elias didn't open the door," Cole said. "But he sent me word through his neighbor's boy. He's frightened, but he hasn't changed his mind." A pause. "Yet." "We need to move faster than Hank does," Claire said. "That's what I came to tell you this morning," Cole said. "Before the storm. Before everything else." He looked at her steadily. "Hank knows something is moving. I don't know how. Maybe someone saw Elias contact me. Maybe someone talked. But he knows. And when Hank knows a thing is moving against him, he doesn't wait." "Neither do I," Claire said. Cole Maddox looked at her for a long, full moment. The afternoon was wide and quiet around them, and entirely indifferent to what was being decided inside it. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Tom Greer came to see me this morning, before Martha went to you." Cole's voice was careful, precise. He said he's been holding a piece of information for 2 years that he didn't know what to do with. He said he found it in a box of old county filings that Hank asked him to store in the feed store basement during a records dispute. He never looked at the time. He stopped. He looked last night. What was in it? Claire said. A copy of Hank Carver's original land acquisition plan for this valley, Cole said, dated 4 months before my wife died, naming this ridge property specifically, with a notation in Hank's own handwriting that says... He stopped, reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out. Claire took it, unfolded it, read. Hank's handwriting was clean and businesslike. The notation was 6 words. Resolve the Maddox situation by fall. The world went very quiet around her. That's not proof of murder, Cole said. I know that. It could mean anything. But combined with Elias's survey records and Martha's testimony about Deke Sully and a letter from Crestfall, he looked at her with the eyes of a man who has been waiting for something to be real for so long that he can barely bring himself to believe it might actually be real. It's a picture, Miss Bennett. It's a complete enough picture that the right eyes outside this county would have to look at it. Claire folded the paper back. Tom Greer is willing to confirm where this came from. He is. And Martha, she will. Claire looked at him. Then we have 3 witnesses' documentary evidence and a potential 4th in Crestfall. She held the paper back out to him. Cole, this is enough. He took it. Didn't put it away immediately. Just held it in his hands and looked at it with the focused, measured attention of a man who has had hope before and has learned the exact cost of misplacing it. If this goes wrong, he said, Hank moves on Elias on Tom Greer on you, in that order, and he will not be pleasant about it. I know, Claire said. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. He looked at her a long, unguarded look, the door further open now than it had ever been, further than she suspected he'd planned to let it go. Why are you doing this? He said. Not the town answer, not the principal answer, the real one. Claire looked back at him without blinking. Because you're a good man, living in a false story, she said, and I am not able to look at a false story and leave it standing. It's a personal failing. Cole held her gaze. That's not a failing, he said quietly. No, she agreed. It isn't. The afternoon held them there for a moment longer. 2 people standing at the exact place where something that had been growing quietly and without permission between them was about to become impossible to call anything other than what it was. Neither of them said it. Neither of them needed to. Cole put the paper in his coat. I'm going to Elias tonight, he said, to make sure the letter gets written and sent before morning. I'll go with you, Claire said. No. He said it firmly. If Hank is watching me, he's watching who I move with. You're more useful to this if he doesn't know how much you already know. He looked at her steadily. Stay visible. Go to school tomorrow. Write your letters. Let him think you're standing still. And you? I'll be moving, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing it. Be careful, she said. I'm always careful, he said. Cole. He stopped. I'll be at the schoolhouse at first light, she said. If you haven't sent word by then, I'm coming to find you. He held her gaze one last time. Then he turned and went to his horse and rode east toward the ridge, and Claire stood and watched until the distance took him, and understood with the full, clear certainty of a woman who does not lie to herself about what she feels. That careful and thorough were 2 very different things, and that what she felt for Cole Maddox had already moved well beyond either. Claire was at the schoolhouse before the sun fully cleared the ridge, and she stood at the door and looked east and waited, and Cole did not come. She unlocked the room, lit the lamp, set out the primers, with hands that moved steadily, because she would not allow them to do anything else, and she taught 11 children through a full morning lesson, without letting her attention drift visibly from the room. But every time boots crossed the boardwalk outside, she heard them. Every time a horse came up the street at anything faster than a walk, she registered it. By noon, no word had come. She dismissed the children for the midday break, and she walked directly to Tom Greer's feed store. Tom was a thick, quiet man who looked like someone had built him specifically for lifting things and hadn't bothered to add extra features. He looked up when Claire came in and set down whatever he'd been doing immediately, which told her that he'd been waiting for her too. "Have you heard from Cole?" she said. "No." Tom's voice was flat and direct. "And I've been watching the East Road since first light." Elias Pruitt. Tom shook his head. "His neighbor's boy came by an hour ago. Said Elias's house is quiet. Curtains closed. Hasn't seen him come out since last night." Claire absorbed this. "Hank, he was at the county clerk's office this morning," Tom said. "Early, before it opened. I saw him standing at the door when I came to open up here." He paused. "Hank Carver does not stand and wait for anything. He was there because something required him to be there urgently." "He's trying to get ahead of Elias's letter," Claire said. "That's what I think." "Then the letter already arrived," Claire said, "which means Elias sent it, which means Cole got to him last night." Tom looked at her. "Or Hank found out Cole was going and moved first." The possibility sat between them like something with weight. "I'm going to the Ridge," Claire said. Tom came around the counter. "I'll go." "No." She said it the way Cole had said it to her the night before, firm-reasoned, not unkind. "You stay visible. If Hank sees both of us moving toward Cole's property together, it tells him too much. Stay here. Watch what he does at the clerk's office. And if Martha hears anything from her sister about Crestfall—" "I'll send you word immediately," Tom said. Then quietly, "Miss Bennett, be careful on that road." "I know the way," she said. She went out the door before she could think too carefully about what she might find at the end of it. She found Cole at the fence line again, exactly where she'd found him the first time she'd walked out to his property, as if the man had a particular relationship with that specific stretch of fence, and returned to it when things required thinking through. He was alive, unhurt, and looked like he had not slept. "I was about to come to you," he said. "I told you first light," she said. "I know. Something happened." He didn't move toward her, and he didn't pull back. He stood his ground and met her eyes with the directness that was the most constant thing about him. "Elias sent the letter. I sat with him while he wrote it, and I watched him seal it, and we walked together to the postal office at 9:30 last night. It's in the mail." "Then why didn't you send word?" "Because on the way back I saw two of Hank's men at the edge of Elias's road." Cole's jaw set. "They weren't doing anything. Just standing there where Elias could see them, making sure he knew they'd seen him with me." Claire went very still. "Did they follow you?" "They tried." The corner of his mouth moved not humor, but something adjacent, the practiced, hard-edged confidence of a man who has navigated his own land in the dark his whole life, and is considerably more capable in it than men who haven't. "They didn't manage it." "You stayed on the ridge all night?" "Until I was sure they'd given up." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry I didn't send word. I didn't want to pull anyone else into that road in the dark." "Cole." She said his name the same way she'd said it in the barn, and watched it land the same way it had the first time, that small involuntary register, the response of a man still learning that someone could say his name like it mattered. "Don't protect me from information. I need to know what you know. That's how this works." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. They stood for a moment with the morning between them, and everything that needed doing arranged in front of them like a fence that needed mending, not pleasant work, but clear work, the kind that has a definable end. "Hank was at the county clerk's office at dawn," she said. Cole nodded slowly, trying to preempt Elias's letter. "Can he?" "Not if the letter's already in the system," Cole said. "The county land office is required to investigate formal surveyor complaints. It's law. What Hank can do is slow it, complicate it, make it expensive for Elias." He paused. "He can make Elias want to retract it before anyone official reads it." "Then we need to make sure Elias understands that retracting it now would be worse for him than standing by it," Claire said. I'll go to him today. I'll come with you. This time, Cole didn't argue with her. He just looked at her for a moment, accepting the change in the arrangement, accepting that certain things had shifted between last night and this morning in ways that made the old argument about keeping her out of the road obsolete. After school, he said. After school, she confirmed. The afternoon brought the first public break in Timber Creek's unified front, and it came from a direction that surprised even Claire. She was walking back from the schoolhouse at 3:30 when she heard raised voices from the direction of the main street. Not a fight, something more formal than that, more structured. She came around the corner and found a gathering 8 or 10 people clustered at the front of the general store, with Hank Carver at the center and Tom Greer facing him. Martha stood beside her husband, with her arms crossed and her expression locked into something that had the shape of composure and the substance of absolute resolve. "I'm telling you what I saw," Tom was saying. "I stored those files in my basement because you asked me to. I didn't know what was in them. Now I do." "You're making an accusation," Hank said. "Based on a document you admit you can't authenticate found in a box you didn't examine at the time." "I know your handwriting, Hank," Tom said. "I've seen it on enough invoices." The crowd was very quiet around them. Not the performative quiet of people pretending not to watch. The genuine quiet of people who are watching something they didn't expect and don't know yet what to do with it. Hank shifted. Claire watched him recalculate, saw the moment he decided that direct confrontation with Tom Greer in public was not the correct move, and pivoted with the smooth expertise of a man who had been managing situations his whole life. "Tom," he said, and his voice went warm. "You've been listening to a woman who came here 3 weeks ago and has already decided she understands 30 years of history in this valley. That's not wisdom. That's a stranger with a version of events that suits her purpose. Her purpose," Martha said in a voice like a door closing, "is to teach children and tell the truth. I've watched her do both." She looked at Hank with the flat, unadorned directness of a woman who had put down something heavy and had no intention of picking it back up. "I saw you with Deke Sully, Hank. I saw what you passed him. I've told Miss Bennett, and I'm telling anyone here who wants to know." The quality of silence in the crowd shifted. Something moved through it, not agreement, yet not conviction. Just the first hairline crack in a structure that had been presented as solid. Hank looked around the crowd. Claire watched him read the room and find it less reliable than it had always been before. He looked at her last. His eyes were cold and flat, and entirely without pretense now. "This isn't over," he said. He walked away. Tom Greer let out a slow breath and looked at his wife. Martha put her hand on his arm briefly, not a performance, just a private thing that happened to be in public, and then looked at Claire. "Well," Martha said, "that's done." "Thank you," Claire said. Martha shook her head. "Don't thank me. I should have said it 2 years ago." She paused. "Any word from Cole?" "He's all right," Claire said. "He'll be in town tomorrow." Something moved across Martha Greer's face. Relief, and beneath it a quality of reckoning with herself that had no easy name. Gay. They went to Elias Pruitt that evening and found him frightened but standing. "2 of Hank's men came to my door this afternoon," Elias said. "Said Hank wanted me to know that my surveyor's license renewal came up next month and that the county board had questions about my methodology on 3 recent filings." He looked at his hands. "Meaning he'll pull my license if I don't back down." "He can't pull your license for filing an accurate complaint," Cole said. "He can make the process complicated enough that I can't work while it's being reviewed," Elias said. "Which is the same thing practically." He looked at Claire. "Miss Bennett, the letter is sent. I can't unsend it. But I can write a follow-up disputing my own filing. If I do that—" "Elias," Cole said. His voice was quiet and even. "Do you believe what's in those field notes?" Elias looked at him. "I've believed it for 3 years." "Then don't write the follow-up. It's easy for you to say, this is your fight." "No," Cole said, and something in his voice shifted, not louder, just more precise. "It stopped being just my fight when a woman lost her license threat, and a man put his business on the line, and a 9-year-old girl started telling her teacher the truth that every adult around her was too afraid to say. He held Elias's gaze steadily. "You're not alone in this. That's what's different from 3 years ago. You were alone then because there was no one willing to stand. That's changed." Elias looked at Cole for a long, hard moment. Then he looked at Claire. "Is it actually changed?" he said. "Or does it just feel that way?" "Tom Greer said it out loud in the middle of the street this afternoon," Claire said. "Martha Greer backed him up in front of 10 witnesses. That's in the record now, the social record, the one that matters in a town this size. Hank can manage a document. He can't unspeak what's been spoken publicly." She paused. "And there's something else. Has anyone contacted you from Crestfall?" Elias looked at her. "No. Why?" "There may be a witness," she said. "Someone who examined the wagon after the accident. Someone who was paid to report it a particular way." She watched Elias absorb this. "If that witness comes forward combined with your letter and Tom's document and Martha's testimony, there is no version of this that stays local. This goes to the county sheriff and then to the state if it needs to." Elias was quiet for a very long moment. Then he straightened in his chair, a small movement but decisive. "I won't write the follow-up," he said. "Tell me what else you need." The letter from Crestfall arrived the following afternoon, and it arrived to Martha Greer, who brought it to Claire at the schoolhouse with both hands, and a face that had gone a particular shade of pale, that comes from reading something that confirms what you hoped and dreaded at the same time. Claire read it at her desk with the children gone and Cole standing by the door. Martha's sister had found Deke Sully inside a week. He had not been difficult to locate, she wrote, because Deke Sully had not built a new life in Crestfall, so much as waited in it, working small jobs, keeping to himself, living the way men live, when they are carrying something they cannot put down and cannot fully carry either. When Martha's sister had explained why she was asking Deke, Sully had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, "I've been waiting for someone to come ask that. I didn't think anyone ever would." He had written a signed statement. It was enclosed. Claire read the statement once, handed it to Cole. He read it. He didn't speak for a moment. He stood very still, and she could see the thing moving in him, the 3-year divide between grief and fury, the unbearable not knowing that had been the particular texture of his suffering, and now it was closing, not with relief, with something heavier and more final than relief. "He saw it happen," Cole said. His voice was level in the way things are level when every available resource is being used to keep them so. "He saw Hank's man at the stage road. He saw what they did to the wheel." He stopped. "He signed this." "He signed it," Claire confirmed. Cole set the letter on the desk. He put both hands flat on the surface and looked at it. "My wife and my son did not die because of a frightened horse," he said. "No," Claire said. "They didn't." The room held that fact between them, not trying to manage it or soften it or move past it, because some facts are too serious for management. They just held it. Then Cole straightened. He took his hands off the desk. He looked at Claire with eyes that were dry and very clear, and carrying something that had no simple name, grief and fury, and the first genuine unguarded opening of relief, all of it mixed together in the way that truth mixes when it finally arrives after a long absence. "We send this to the county sheriff today," he said. "Today," Claire agreed. "All of it. Elias's letter, Tom's document, Martha's statement, Deke's signed account." "I'll write a covering letter from me," Claire said. "An outside party, a professional, someone with no prior standing in this dispute." She looked at him steadily. "It will carry weight." Cole held her gaze. The door was fully open now, and both of them knew it. "You understand what Hank will do when he realizes this has left the county," he said. "Yes. He will come for you first. Before me, before Tom, before Elias. Because you're the one he can frame as the outside agitator, the woman who came here and poisoned a community." "Let him try," Claire said. Something happened in Cole's face then, Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, the way a door comes all the way open when the hand is finally confident enough to push it fully. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has stopped counting the cost of what he feels, and decided it doesn't matter what it costs. "Claire," he said, first time he'd used her given name. She felt it exactly the way she'd watched him feel it when she'd used his. The small involuntary stillness of being called by a name as if it had value. She waited. "When this is over," he said. "When Hank has been dealt with, and the record is straight, and this town has been given the truth, what are you going to do?" She looked at him. "I'm going to keep teaching." "Here. I haven't been offered a reason to leave." He held her gaze, and the thing that had been building between them since the corral, since the books, since the storm in the barn, since his hand over hers in the field, it had a name now. They both knew it. Neither of them said it, because some things that have been earned slowly deserve to be spoken slowly. "All right," he said quietly, and the way he said it not as a concession, not as an agreement, but as a man who has just been handed something he had stopped believing. The world still had available, told her everything she needed to know about what all right meant to him in that moment. Martha delivered the full package of evidence to the county sheriff's postal office that same evening. She went herself, which was her choice, and she went openly, which was deliberate, because in a town with Timber Creek's particular social architecture, being seen doing something was its own form of testimony. Hank Carver knew by nightfall. Cole heard it from Tom Greer's neighbor's boy, who was becoming something of an informal dispatch service, which Cole noted was a sign of how thoroughly the town's loyalties were fracturing, and Cole rode to town at first dark and went directly to Tom's feed store. "How bad?" Cole said. Tom looked at him steadily. "He's called in a debt he holds on my store," Tom said. "I have 30 days to pay what I owe, or he takes the building." Cole absorbed this. "How much?" Tom named the figure. Cole was quiet for a moment. "I can cover half of it," he said. Tom stared at him. "Cole?" "I've been sitting on Ridgeland for 3 years," Cole said. "I haven't spent money on much of anything. Half of what you owe I can cover." He held Tom's gaze. "You stood up in that street. You put your name on what you knew. You don't lose your store for that." Tom Greer, who was not a sentimental man and had not cried at anything in recent memory, looked at the floor for a moment and said nothing. "The other half," Cole said, "we get from the county. Hank calling in that debt knowing a package of evidence had just been mailed to the sheriff is its own kind of evidence. It's retaliation and it's documented." Tom nodded slowly. Then, "He also went to the school board in Harlan." Cole looked at him. What did he tell them? That Miss Bennett had been conducting herself improperly in Timber Creek, spending inappropriate time with a man of disreputable character, undermining community trust. Tom paused. His words. Something moved through Cole's face. Not fury, something colder and more purposeful than fury. "When sent the wire this morning." Cole put on his hat. "Then I need to talk to Claire." She took the news the way she took everything, without flinching, without performing composure, just genuinely composed in the way that comes from a person who has decided in advance what they will and will not be broken by. "He's attacking your reputation," Cole said, "because it's the fastest weapon he has left." "I know," Claire said. "This could follow you, past this town, other positions." "I know that too. Claire." He stopped. He was standing in the middle of the schoolroom with his hat in his hand again, which she had come to understand meant the thing he was carrying required care in its delivery. "If you step back from this right now, if you create some distance between yourself and me, you could still protect your professional standing. You've done enough. The evidence is sent. Elias Tom Martha Deke Sully. It doesn't require you anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" "No," he said immediately, then quieter. "No, it's the opposite of what I want. But what I want is not." "Cole." She crossed the room to where he stood and looked up at him with the direct, steady attention she'd aimed at him since the very first day at the corral. "I didn't come this far to step back because Hank Carver sent a wire." She paused. "I stepped back from something unjust once when I was 12 years old because I was afraid. I have not done it since. I don't intend to start again." He looked at her face, reading it the way he always read things carefully, completely looking for what was solid, what would hold. "You're sure," he said. "I've been sure since the day I walked up your East Road," she said. Cole Maddox stood in the middle of the schoolroom that smelled of chalk and primer and the particular dry wood of new construction, and he looked at Claire Bennett with all the doors open. Every one of them. Nothing held back, nothing managed or contained or carefully rationed. And he put his hand against her face, gently, briefly, the way a man touches something he has not let himself want for so long that the wanting itself feels almost unbearable. "I'm going to fix this," he said quietly. "All of it. And when it's fixed—" "When it's fixed," she said, and her hand came up and covered his. They stood like that for one still moment. Not a conclusion, not a beginning, but the exact point between them, where everything that had been growing in the space of glances and plain speech and hands held briefly over fence lines finally had its name. Then he stepped back and put his hat on with the same deliberate calm he brought to every practical thing. "Hank Carver is going to make one more move," he said. "I can feel it. He's losing, and he knows it, and a man like that doesn't accept losing without swinging one more time." "Let him swing," Claire said. "We'll be ready." Cole looked at her one more time from the doorway, and what was in his face was not the absence of expression she'd first read at the corral. It was not the locked-down containment of a man who has learned to need nothing. It was something entirely different, something that had been buried under 3 years of grief and accusation and organized erasure, and had survived all of it intact because the truest things in a person tend to survive what should have destroyed them. It was hope. Plain and unperformed, and entirely real. He went out. Claire stood in the empty schoolroom and let herself feel the full weight of the evening. Not with fear, not with the careful management of a woman preparing for the worst, but with the clear, grounded certainty of someone who has found the thing worth standing for and has decided without reservation to stand. Outside, Cole's horse moved east toward the ridge. And for the first time in 3 years, the lamp that burned alone in that window against 3 miles of dark was not a symbol of isolation. It was a signal. And she received it. Hank Carver made his move the next morning, and he made it early before the town was fully awake, because men who are losing tend to move in the dark. He is. Cole heard the horses from inside the house before he saw anything. 2 riders coming up the East Road at a pace that was not a social call. He was at the door before they reached the fence, and he stood on the porch with his arms at his sides and watched them come. The man in front was Pete Callan, Hank's foreman, a man Cole had known for years without ever having a reason to trust him. The man behind was a deputy sheriff named Willis from the next town over, a young man Cole had never met, wearing a badge that had been borrowed for the occasion, and a look on his face that suggested he was not entirely comfortable with the purpose of this morning's ride. "Cole Maddox," Pete said. "There's a complaint filed against you. Threatening behavior toward Hank Carver. The deputy's here to bring you in for questioning." Cole looked at the deputy. "What exactly is the complaint?" The deputy pulled out a folded paper. Read from it with the careful attention of a man who wants to get the words right. "Willful intimidation, trespassing on property of Hank Carver on the evening of—" "I haven't been on Hank's property," Cole said. "Not in 3 years. The complaint says otherwise." "The complaint is false." Pete Callan shifted in his saddle. "That's not for you to decide out here, Maddox. Come along quiet, and you can say your piece in town." Cole looked at him for a long moment. He understood exactly what this was: not justice, not law, but the last available tool of a man who had run out of better options. Get Cole in custody, however briefly, and the story changes. The accused man, the guilty man, finally brought in. It didn't need to stick. It only needed to exist long enough to muddy the water. "All right," Cole said. Pete blinked. He'd clearly prepared for an argument. "All right, I'll come in." Cole said. On my own horse at my own pace. And when I get to town, I want every person who's willing to witness what you're doing standing where they can see it. He looked at the deputy. You have a right to question me. I have a right to be questioned publicly. The deputy, to his credit, looked relieved. That's fine. Cole saddled his horse. He rode to town between the two men, unhurried, his back straight, his face carrying the expression that Claire had first read as coldness, and now understood as something else entirely, the absolute refusal of a man to be diminished by anyone's version of him. Claire was at the schoolhouse when Nettie Walsh ran in without knocking, which the girl had never done before. They're bringing Mr. Maddox in, Nettie said, breathing hard. Pete Callan and a deputy. They're coming up the main street right now. Claire was out the door in 30 seconds. She came around the corner and saw Cole on horseback between the two men moving at a walk, and she saw the small crowd already forming on the boardwalks, the particular quality of attention a town gives to a spectacle it has been waiting for and is not sure it wanted. She saw Hank Carver standing outside the council office with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something he has arranged arrive on schedule. She walked directly into the middle of the street. Cole saw her. His eyes found her the way they always found her, immediately, directly, without searching. She stood her ground and looked at him and gave him a single small nod. I'm here. He straightened almost imperceptibly. 1 degree. The acknowledgement of a man who had carried everything alone for so long that the simple fact of not being alone had a physical effect on his posture. Pete Callan pulled up. Miss Bennett, this is official business. I'm aware, she said. I'm not stopping anything. I'm standing here. She looked at the deputy. What is the official charge? Complaint of threatening behavior and trespassing. Filed by whom? Hank Carver. Claire turned and looked at Hank across the street. He held her gaze with the composure of a man who believed he still held all the cards and was waiting for the moment to lay them. She turned back to the deputy. I'd like that on record, please. The complainant's name. Ma'am, this isn't a courtroom. Everything that happens in this street today is on record, Claire said clearly and without anger. Because there are 15 people watching, and people remember what they witness. She looked at the crowd on both sides. Don't they? Tom Greer stepped off the boardwalk and into the street. He crossed to where Claire was standing. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her facing the deputy and Pete Callan, his hands loose at his sides. Martha came out of the feed store doorway and crossed too. Then Bess Walsh, who came out with Nettie beside her and stood with her daughter's hand in hers and her chin up. The deputy looked at the growing line of people in the street. He looked at Pete Callan. He looked at Cole. He folded the complaint paper and put it in his pocket. Mr. Maddox, he said, I'd like to take your statement at the council office. Voluntarily, if you're willing. I'm willing, Cole said. Hank Carver was no longer smiling. The county sheriff arrived 2 days later. Not the borrowed deputy, the actual sheriff, a gray-haired man named Aldred, who wore his authority the way capable men wear it, without display, without apology, without the need to remind anyone it was there. He came with 2 official deputies and a document case, and he went first to the council office, and then to Elias Pruitt's house, and then to Tom Greer's feed store, and the order of those visits told everyone in Timber Creek exactly what he had come for. He came to the schoolhouse last. Claire opened the door and looked at him. He had the particular eyes of a man who reads people quickly and doesn't revise his first assessment very often because he doesn't need to. Miss Bennett, he said, your letters are thorough. I try to be, she said. Come in. He sat down at one of the student chairs, not the teacher's chair, which she also noted, and put his document case on his knee. I need to tell you something that isn't public knowledge yet, he said. The evidence package you sent didn't just open a complaint in this county. It connected to an investigation that's been running in 2 counties west of here for 8 months. Claire was very still. Hank Carver. 3 land acquisitions in Millfield and Crestwood counties over the past 6 years, Sheriff Aldred said. Same pattern. Land he wanted owners who refused to sell accidents or misfortunes that created openings. We had the pattern. We didn't have the mechanism. He tapped the document case. Deke Sully's statement and Elias Pruitt's original survey notes gave us the mechanism. And Tom Greer's document. He paused. The notation. Resolve the Maddox situation by fall. That's not ambiguous. No, Claire said. It isn't. Hank Carver is being taken into formal custody this afternoon, the sheriff said. For fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. The accident what happened to Ruth and James Maddox, that's a separate and more serious matter that will take longer. But it's being investigated. Officially, with the state involved. Claire sat with that for a moment. All of it, the full shape of it. Does Cole know? She said. Not yet, the sheriff said. I wanted to speak with you first, given... He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who has observed a great deal and said less than he knows. Given the nature of your involvement. I'll tell him, Claire said. The sheriff nodded. He stood, picked up his case. At the door he paused. Miss Bennett, in my experience, cases like this one don't move unless someone outside the situation is willing to put themselves inside it. Most people don't do that. It's uncomfortable, and the personal cost is real. He looked at her steadily. You did good work here. So did a lot of people, she said. I just gave them somewhere to put what they already knew. He left. Claire sat alone in the empty schoolroom for a moment with the full weight of it. Not triumph. Nothing as simple as that. Something heavier and more honest. The particular feeling of a thing that has been wrong for a long time, being very slowly, imperfectly, and permanently corrected. Then she put on her coat and went to find Cole. So, she found him at the ridge. He was where he always was when something required thinking, at the fence line looking east, still as a man who has learned that patience is not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. She came up beside him and told him everything. All of it. The sheriff, the other counties, the formal investigation, the custody. She said it in the same plain, direct order she always used, without softening or dramatizing, because Cole Maddox had earned the plain truth, and she would not insult him with anything less. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Ruth and James, he said finally. The investigation will take time, she said. The sheriff was honest about that. It's more complicated legally, but it's moving, officially, with people who have authority and no connection to Hank's money. Cole looked out at the ridge. His hands on the fence rail were steady. Everything about him was steady, which she understood now, not as coldness, but as the supreme effort of a man who feels things deeply and has learned to carry them without letting them carry him. 3 years, he said, quiet, not to her specifically, to the fact of it, to the gap between what had been and what was now arriving. 3 years, she said, standing beside him. Not trying to bridge the gap, or close the distance, or fill the space, just being in it with him. Which was, she had come to understand exactly what he needed. Not rescue, not resolution, presence. He turned and looked at her. You did this, he said. No, she said. Elias did it. Tom and Martha did it. Bess Walsh did it. Nettie did it honestly before any of the rest of us. That girl has been telling the truth about you since the day she walked into my classroom. She paused. I just came to a town that needed a teacher. Claire. He said her name the way he'd said it the first time, with the full weight of what it meant to him, which was still something she had to let herself receive without deflecting. Don't thank me, she said. I'm not thanking you, he said. He turned from the fence to face her fully. And what was in his face was everything the door had been holding back for 3 years. Not just the grief, not just the fury, not just the exhaustion of survival, but the other things too. The things that had been there before any of it. The things that had survived all of it. The warmth and the humor and the particular quality of care that came out in fixed door latches and fences built in snow, and a hand steadying a box of books on a street full of people watching. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask it, she said. "When this is settled, all of it legally officially, and this town has had time to reckon with itself. And I'm just a man again, not a story." He held her gaze with the absolute directness that was the most essentially true thing about him. "Will you stay here, not for the children, not for the school?" A pause. "For me." Claire looked at him for a long moment. The ridge was quiet around them, and the afternoon was wide and patient, and in no hurry at all. "Cole Maddox," she said. "I have written 12 weeks of lesson plans. I have filed letters with 4 county offices. I have stood in the middle of your main street twice in a week and told Hank Carver things he didn't want to hear." She looked at him steadily without blinking. "What does that tell you?" Something happened in his face, the full, uncontained version of that barely visible, almost smile she'd seen in the barn. Not contained this time, not managed. Just real and entirely transforming, and exactly as she'd known it would be. He took her hand. His palm was rough and warm and sure, the hand of a man who builds things and fixes things and does not let them fall, and he held her hand in both of his, the way he'd held the box of books that first day on the street, with the careful, competent certainty of someone who understands value when it's in front of him. "Stay," he said quietly. One word, the same weight as yes. "Already decided," she said. Hank Carver was taken into formal custody that afternoon. He walked out of the council office between 2 of Sheriff Aldred's deputies with the particular expression of a man who is still performing composure, because composure is the only thing he has left to perform, and the composure was thin enough that everyone watching could see the structure beneath it had already given way. The town watched. They stood on both sides of the street, and they watched in the silence of people who are confronting in public and in real time the distance between what they believed and what was true. It was not a comfortable silence. It was not supposed to be. Cole was there. He stood on the boardwalk outside the feed store with Tom Greer beside him and watched Hank Carver walk to the sheriff's wagon without expression. He did not look satisfied. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had spent 3 years waiting for a truth to be acknowledged and found now that it had arrived that acknowledgement was quieter than expected, more ordinary, more final. Reverend Dawson crossed the street and stood in front of Cole. The 2 men looked at each other. The Reverend was not a man without conscience. Claire had always understood that about him. He was a man whose conscience had for a long time lost arguments to his practicality. He looked at Cole now with eyes that had finished losing that argument. "I owe you an apology," the Reverend said. "Not a small one." Cole looked at him. "Are you offering it?" "I am." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm hearing it," he said. Not accepting it cleanly, not dismissing it. Hearing it. The appropriate response to an apology that cannot undo what it is apologizing for. The Reverend nodded once slowly and stepped back. Martha Greer touched Cole's arm as she passed. A brief, solid contact. No words. He acknowledged it with a nod. And then, Nettie Walsh came out of the crowd. She was 9 years old and serious-eyed and entirely unintimidated by the weight of the moment around her, and she walked directly up to Cole Maddox the way she did everything with purpose and without hesitation, and looked up at him. "Mr. Maddox," she said. "I'm glad they know now." Cole looked down at her. Something moved through his face that was too quick for Claire to fully name before it was contained again, but she caught it. The edge of it. The specific thing that happens to a person's expression when they are moved past their own capacity for composure by something small and genuine and entirely without calculation. "Thank you, Nettie," he said. His voice was level, just barely. Nettie nodded as if something had been settled and went back to her mother. Bess Walsh met Cole's eyes over her daughter's head, and what passed between them, this woman who had fixed the porch step in her heart long before she fixed anything in public, and this man who had done it without asking for anything, was the kind of understanding that doesn't require words. They went to the creek that evening. It was Claire's suggestion, and she made it the way she made all her suggestions as a statement rather than a question, because she had learned that Cole responded better to clarity than to options. "Come with me to the creek," she said. And he came. They sat on the bank and listened to the water and said nothing for a long time, which was a different kind of nothing from the nothing that had surrounded Cole for 3 years. That nothing had been the absence of people. This was the presence of one person and the understanding that her presence required no performance, no management, no careful rationing of himself. "I forgot what this felt like," he said. "What, sitting somewhere and not being alone in it." Claire looked at the water. "You weren't alone these last weeks," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." "No," he said. "I knew it. I've known it since the day you walked up my East Road and asked me a straight question and waited for the straight answer." He paused. "I just didn't trust it. I've learned not to trust things that feel like they're good." "And now?" she said. He turned and looked at her. The evening light was doing what evening light does, and in it, Cole Maddox looked like the man he had been before all of it, and also like the man he was after all of it, and also like something that was neither of those things, but had been made by both of them. More honest than either. More durable. "Now," he said, "I'm learning to trust this." Claire looked back at him with the full directness she'd aimed at him since the corral. "Good," she said, "because I don't intend to be easy to distrust." He reached out and tucked a strand of wind-loose hair from her face. The same hand that had touched her face in the schoolroom, deliberate and careful, the gesture of a man who takes nothing for granted and therefore takes everything with full attention. She turned her face slightly into it, just slightly, and he left his hand there for a moment. "Tell me what you want," he said. "For what comes next?" "A full classroom," she said. "All 14 children back and more when the family's to the south here. There's a real school here." She paused. "A fixed roof on the schoolhouse before winter. And—" she looked at him. "A reason to ride east on the Ridge Road that isn't someone being in trouble." He looked at her. "I think I can arrange that last one," he said. "Then we have a plan," she said. And they sat by the water as the evening settled around them, and what existed between them was not the fragile, tentative thing that new feelings tend to be. It was something built on the only material that lasts: plain truth, plain action, and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself, but simply goes on day after day in the face of everything arranged to make it stop. The official investigation into the deaths of Ruth and James Maddox took 4 months. At the end of it, the state issued a formal finding that the wagon accident had been deliberately caused. Hank Carver faced charges in 3 counties. Deke Sully testified in full, and his voice broke twice in the telling, and both times he steadied himself and kept going. Elias Pruitt sat in the front row of the courtroom and watched with the composed, exhausted expression of a man who has finally put down the heaviest thing he ever carried. Tom Greer paid the last of his store debt from his own earnings, because by the time the account came due, enough of Hank's influence had dissolved that no one was collecting it urgently. Timber Creek changed slowly, the way genuine change always moves, not in a moment of public declaration, but in accumulated small decisions. A word spoken at a town meeting that would not have been spoken before. A door opened to a man who was no longer being made invisible. A child bringing home a primer and reading it cover to cover without stopping. Cole Maddox remained on the ridge on the land his family had built on the land no one had managed to take from him. He came to town more than once a week now. People met his eye. Some of them spoke. Some of them shook his hand. He received all of it with the same directness he'd always carried, and with something new beneath it, the particular steadiness of a man who has been seen accurately by someone he loves and has decided with all the information now available to him that the world is worth engaging with again. Claire Bennett finished her first full year with 22 students, the 14 who had started, and 8 more, including 2 older children whose parents had held back from the beginning and reconsidered by November. She wrote to the county board and received written acknowledgement that the complaint against her professional conduct had been formally withdrawn and removed from record. She put the letter in a desk drawer and did not look at it again. On the last day of the school year, she rode east on the Ridge Road, And Cole Maddox met her at the fence line where they had stood for the first time, the place where she had asked him a straight question, and he had given her a straight answer. And everything that followed from that had followed from the simple and permanent fact that two people had been honest with each other in a world that rewarded dishonesty. He helped her down from the horse and did not let go of her hand. "Well," she said, "I stayed." "You did," he said. "You're going to have to do something about that," she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the corral, with the full uncalculated attention of a man who sees what is in front of him and names it without flinching. Then he pulled her close, and in the broad and indifferent afternoon on the ridge that had been his family's and remained his by sheer unbreakable will, Cole Maddox kissed Claire Bennett with everything that 3 years of surviving had made room for, all the things that grief had held in storage, all the warmth that silence had kept intact, all the tenderness that no amount of hatred had managed to extinguish. When they separated, he kept his forehead against hers for a moment. "I have a question," he said. "Ask it," she said. "Stay. Not for the school, not for the children, not for the truth we spent 4 months making official." He looked at her with every door open and every light burning. "For this. For me." Claire looked at the man who had refused to disappear when an entire town demanded it, who had fixed what was broken in the dark without asking anyone to notice, who had survived the unsurvivable by being in the most essential and unperformable sense exactly who he was. "Cole Maddox," she said, "I made up my mind the day I walked up your East Road and you told me the truth without being asked twice. Everything since then has just been the story of us figuring out what we'd already decided." He held her face in his hands. "Then it's a good story," he said. "It's the best kind," she said. "The kind that's true." In Timber Creek, the children went home at the end of the school year with fuller minds and straighter spines, and the early unshakable knowledge that the heart of a place is not found in its loudest voices or its cruelest stories, but in the people who refuse to let those stories be the last word. The lamp on the ridge burned that night as it had burned every night, but not alone anymore, and not as a signal of endurance, as a light that had found at last exactly what it was lit for.